I'm Mark Baer. This is the second half of my conversation with Dmitri Piterman. We're talking Salvador Dali and the opening of the Dali 17 project, a permanent exhibit at the Museum of Monterey. If you didn't see the first half of this interview, go to markdavidbaer.com. Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching Conversations, Collaborations. I'm with Dmitri Piterman. We're talking Salvador Dali. So here we are in the 1980s. His hands are shaking, and his things are going bad.
Well, so at that time, his art became increasingly more well known. His lithographs were selling in thousands in 70s of dollars, and more and more galleries became interested in selling his work. But he was increasingly less active in the market. So there was one singular case, I believe, where he approved, designed a lithograph and pre-signed 100 sheets, which in essence, as a factual act, makes no difference. Lithograph was approved, and it was under supervised conditions. Those sheets were reserved for when he was traveling so they could print the lithograph. That fact became known, which is, again, like I said, not a big deal. And some of the unscrupulous gallery owners tried to replicate this forgery, so to speak, by claiming that Dali has pre-signed the sheets. Now, the signature of itself on a lithograph or etching plays very little difference. Some of the most valuable etchings and lithographs that he created in Torres are not even signed. They still have more value than some that have been signed. But anyways, they use this as a ploy to create more lithographs. In a couple of those galleries, I believe there was one in Hawaii and there was one in Spain that created that fraudulent art, was able to produce some amount of lithographs and etching after 1980. Now, fortunately for the Dali collectors and so to speak, market, both Arches and what's the other paper company, created infinity sign on the paper after 1980. So if you take the sheet of...
It's like a watermark.
Watermark.
Yeah.
You look at it, you see infinity mark, you know the paper was created after 1980. And Dali said, I have not signed anything after 1980. And this is when most of the... So it got filtered out of the market pretty quickly. But there was a moment in time where Sotheby's and Christie's were not clear which art is authentic, which is not, because they all bear a signature. There weren't many catalogs at that time of what work he actually created and published. And all that got cleared out about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There were two different catalog companies that came out with all the authentic lithographs and etchings that Dali has created. And of course, it's now one of the best-selling artists in Sotheby's and Christie's. And why lithographs and etchings? Well, Dali, during his lifetime, painted about 300 paintings. He had a few drawings, but mainly it was painting, and his most favorite medium was etchings, mixed media prints, and lithographs. He created more than 1,500 works in that medium.
Which was pretty, a revolutionary move.
Yeah.
Yeah. Picasso had started this.
Yes.
Matisse had started this, but this is still fairly a new way of doing.
Sure. And yes, like you said, Picasso was one of the first ones, and in fact, Dali's first work came from Picasso, reference from Picasso. He went to see him in Paris, and he recommended a work that was initially submitted for Picasso, and Dali did it instead of Picasso. Now, Dali loved it for various reasons. Number one, because it was a best way to create affordable work for everybody. You know, painting take a long time. Sometimes painting took 1 to 2 years to finish, and he worked in different paintings at the same time. Lithographs he could create relatively easy in larger numbers, 100, 150 pieces. And but the difference between his work in lithographs and etching and Picasso, for example, is Picasso would create art, and then he'd take 2 printers and they would create lithograph or an etching, which still authentic Picasso. He still approved it, he still signed it, and those lithographs are, you know, very valuable right now. But Dali has created a lot of lithographs and etchings himself. He actually worked on the stones himself. He actually created color, painted in reverse. He has used acid, used grease, and used press himself. This is why a lot of his lithographs and etchings have designation as original. Not authentic, but original, because he created the stone himself. And very few artists did that during that time. It was a lot simpler just to create artwork and then have an artist transfer it into stone or plates. And some of the plates, you know, one of the etchings or lithographs could have up to 20 plates. And, you know, Dali, for example, he created Don Quixote, which is part of the collection, which he used a shotgun, and he shot color paint at the stones. And stones were pretty heavy, pretty old-fashioned limestones. And he said he worked so hard on this, he got hernia. And it's a very, very dirty process, because you have to grease everything up, cover in grease, cover in oil and acid, and produce tremendous prints. So that's why, for me, it's a lot more interesting his work in the media of lithographs and etchings than in painting, because out of 300 paintings, there's few paintings in Figueres, there's few paintings in St. Petersburg, in Prado Museum, in Metropolitan Museum, and a lot of them in private hands. So if you want to see all the paintings, it's under one roof, it's virtually impossible.
I saw a good deal of them in New York a few years ago. Seeing those paintings in life is different than seeing the reproductions in the book. You know, they're bigger, they're clearer. Those canvases are Vermeer-like. They're, you know, absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And but he didn't do a lot of them. But what he used the painterly part of his life for is to develop his language.
Yeah.
And that language stayed with him, and, you know, the elephants, the ants, the tigers, the the eggs, you know, all the things that became, you know, the hoops and the rhymes and
symbolic of this.
All that language he took with him, and he used that same language to tell different stories. And I think he wanted to do, you know, and that's where he came into, you know, into the later years. And so that must be, so I want to get back again to your collection and how you started putting these things together, and how piece by piece came.
Yeah, sure. So he was hired to illustrate different books, and a lot of them take greater meaning, you know, like, of course, he has some amazing pieces that is world renowned, like Persistence of Memory. You know, that painting actually been reproduced in many books, and but it's a relatively small piece. Piece. Some of his lithographs and etchings are much bigger and even clearer. Also, it's easy to trace kind of the meaning behind it, because, you know, illustrations, for example, he was hired by Italian government to do Dante Alighieri's for 500 years since birth of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. And so he did 104 woodblocks from purgatory to hell to heaven, and each one had 30 plus. And each one of those woodblock prints had 24 different colors. so very complex. He also did Capricious of Goya, where he reworked the dark etchings of Goya. And that's also original etchings that I have and will be in exposition. He added color, he added figures in that. He actually borrowed plates of Goya from Prado and reworked them. He also did Sacred Bible illustration for 100 or so prints. Very exquisite, very big, where he illustrated important subjects of a Bible. All of those sets, once you consider his artistic skills, his background, and the original books that he was publishing, becomes very significant, so to speak, illustration on what he did and why he did it and how he did it. It becomes more meaningful rather than stare at some portrait of some wealthy person. And he's done a lot of those portraits as well in very surrealist settings. That's why my goal is eventually to house under the same roof the entire retrospective work of his graphics, which is, tourists or art lovers are able to observe in one place. They don't need to travel to New York or Tokyo or St. Petersburg or Spain to see few paintings. They could just come here and see his entire retrospective of his original, authentic lithographs and etchings.
Let's go back to your collecting and your building passion. I'm always interested in the collector,
Okay, yeah.
and just the mad passion for this.
I couldn't explain it myself, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I started first rationalizing, buying few sets. As you might know, Dali's art was sold in portfolios. You have a portfolio of 20 or 30 different etchings or lithographs. So I would buy a portfolio. Of course, it might have 20 or 30 pieces. Well, I rationalized it that I would frame them and have them around the house. And we had a house in Oakland Hills, and we had a house in Spain. So I said, well, it could absorb in those two homes. And I had a house in Tahoe, so I had a few more, so to speak, wall spaces to observe. But very quickly it became prohibitive, kind of.
Let's talk about you a little bit. So you didn't even come here until you were to the States until you were 15. And how did?
That's right.
Let's go back a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so in '79 we immigrated from old Soviet Union. The place I came from is actually now Ukraine, Odessa. It's still predominantly Russian population, and I come to Brooklyn High School, 2.5 years in high school there, and then thanks to my athletics, I got scholarship to go to Berkeley.
And what was your event? So tell me.
I did track and field, so my main events were long jump, triple jump, and high hurdles. And my best event was triple jump. That's why I was state champion and the city champion, I think, at least 6 times, starting in my sophomore year.
So did you have, when you landed, were you already athletic? Did you already have these skills when you got there?
That's right. I competed in track and field in old Soviet Union, in Russia. By the time I got to New York, I kind of requalified myself a little bit, because I remember when I came to my high school training, first training, they asked me what events I could do. I said long jump, triple jump, high jump, and sprints. So, and we had kind of like a internal track meet, and as it happens, on my first ever triple jump, I broke the school record. And they said, well, we definitely need a triple jumper. So in that same year, as a sophomore, I think I just turned 16, I won New York City Championship, which was a surprise to myself because they had lots of great athletes.
So this is a big deal.
Yeah, and Bob Beeman, in fact, was in high school in Queens much earlier, 10, 15 years earlier, but he had a record in triple jump, that indoor triple jump that I actually broke. And so anyways, so I started improving, and of course by senior year I was winning everything, and that got me to a national meet in Sacramento. And after that, I wanted to come to California, and eventually got me a scholarship to Berkeley.
I'm Mark Baer. I'm with Dmitri Piterman. We're talking Salvador Dali. I will be right back. You are watching Conversations and Collaborations. For all episodes, go to markdavidbaer.com. Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching Conversations and Collaborations. I'm with Dmitri Piterman.
So I went to Cal. I studied political economy. So here I am, kind of escaping old Soviet Union. Communism is crumbling, and right at the time when I'm, graduating from Berkeley, and which by that time was known as People's Republic of Berkeley. And it was actually an interesting change for me because you start view things differently. I study politics and economy and everything from Das Kapital, from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, to different political systems, all the way from Prince Machiavelli back to modern times. So everything fascinated me, and this Berkeley environment, so to speak, thinking outside the box, was very conducive to perhaps my perception of the world and what kind of art really attracted me. And this kind of revolutionary thinking and Dalinian, so to speak, method really attracted me. Perhaps it's a mixture of all these exposures and
your mother
trouble.
was a teacher. Let's go back to your family a little
Well,
bit.
she was a teacher. She loved art. She loved classical art, Italian painters and so forth. So initially I left with my father. She came 3 years later. But we would send her art books, I remember, and from Italy even. So there was some exposure, I guess, way back when I was a child, and now as an adult, having graduated from Berkeley and having developing an interest in taste for art, well, I guess it all made sense now, Dalinian kind of. Also, the fact that he had connection to Spain and the fact that I was training for Spanish Olympics only made it all more interesting and fascinating. And of course, my years in Spain and visiting the museums there and visiting, Dali Museum and Picasso Museum and in Barcelona, different structures built by Gaudi, they're very also surreal, so to speak.
Yeah.
All that promoted the same kind of interest for art and surrealist or impressionist art. So as I started collecting more and more, it got to the point where I could not absorb it into just my house, so it became clear that I'll have to share it with the world in one form or another. And this is when my residence in small town Tossa de Mar in Spain coincided with meeting this mayor of town who wanted to have another touristic attraction. It's an old medieval town that dates back to 1200. And I had an exposition there for, like I said, 3 years. Then I was also approached by another mayor of another town in Belgium, Mouscron, that also wanted to have an exposition there, and I kind of divided in 2 different years in summertime. Part of the exposition went to Belgium, and I rotate them. All that kind of came to an end when we decided to move back from Europe in 2007, after about 10 years living in Europe. And between 2007 and now, I guess, I was contemplating what should I do next. How should I share this with the world? United States is different from Spain or European countries.
And the collection is still constantly growing at this time.
Yes,
Still.
less so, mainly because, I, for example, had a portrait of Salvador Dali's mother, painting that he did when he was like 8 years old only. And that painting required, special preservation. It's oil. It was original oil, and from, I believe, 1924. So it had to be stored in special chamber with special temperature, otherwise the oil start crackling and so forth. So I decided to sell it because just maintenance and have it sit in safe didn't make any sense. Yes, I did acquire some other pieces, for example, lithographs that is much easier to store, but I was more interested in trying to figure out what to do and how to do it and where to do it. And I even approached Berkeley at one point, at late 2007, 8, 9. They built new art museum at Cal. I think they finished it this year. And the old one had still some collections and exposition, but I think they were planning to close it down. And one of the ideas I had was to have an exposition there. Of course, again, it had no connection. And as I spoke to university officials, they were reluctant to delegate the entire museum just to one artist. They were more interested in rotational kind of work with different artists. So then, of course, having this large collection sit in the vaults and be shown only part of the year didn't make sense. And so it's just, like I said, about a year ago, this opportunity in Pebble Beach and in Monterey area all of a sudden made perfect sense. And here we are, trying to revive the history of the art in Monterey area.
So this is really exciting for me. As I told you when we first met,
Yeah.
because again, I was executive director of the Museum of Monterey for several years and involved in it. And again, we're talking about a site where the TED conference started. We're talking about a place that has been an innovative thing. My emphasis was always to be local global, and always about the museum as a starting point. What went on the walls was a starting point for a greater conversation. I also learned that what happens in the museum, it's almost like I like to say a sacred secular space, in that people bring their best thoughts, their best selves to a museum. I learned by being there how many different things it can be to so many different people. And I was waiting for you now to really plug it in. I see so many opportunities with Dali. First of all, it really brings the focus into creativity, imagination, adventure, mystery. He touched on so many things, both art, science, design, decoration. We start again here just as a historical reference when he came to the Hotel Del Monte to do his big ball. I think it was in 1941.
Yeah, he came to the area in 1941 and he was here until 47, I believe.
Yeah. So again, had history on the peninsula.
Yeah. So Dali became increasingly well known in the art community in Hollywood. He was featured in Time magazine, I believe, twice on the cover.
With the portrait by Man Ray was with him.
Right, and so people knew him, people recognized him. He became increasingly more popular, and like you said, in 1941 he had this ball in Del Monte Hotel, where all the Hollywood stars attended. And in fact, 75th anniversary is coming up this September, I think 2nd of September, and we will try to do something to commemorate that. And he held the ball to help starving artists in Europe and displaced artists by war. And that was his main purpose, but it's also created kind of like a landmark event that happened in Monterey. This museum location is absolutely perfect. First of all, it's in an area where historically could be traced back to 17-mile drive. You know, most people think of 17-mile drive as Pebble Beach, but it's actually started from Del Monte Hotel and ended in the Carmel Mission. And the 17-mile was a straight line. It wasn't a loop, and it basically went, if it could be traced, right underneath the Dali Museum. In the area that, like you said, very rich culturally, has history with TED, and I can see absolutely that this museum could become center of creative activities, both in outward and intellectual and cultural. And that, of course, would be the greatest goal. It's not easily achieved, but it would be fantastic if that could be referenced for all the kind of thinking outside the box. You know, that we have to have think tanks, well, thinking outside the tank, I guess. That would be a center for anything from Whale Fest to cultural festivals and to intellectual festivals that could be held in that area.
Yeah, we have a theater, so we can do lectures. It's on the broadband grid here, so you have the ability to televise and disseminate throughout the world. Mm-hmm. And it's been sitting there waiting for you. It's so exciting.
It almost seems like destined, right?
Like to stress, and which I've heard you stress, it's not always about the historical Dali or the Dali of the past, but it's also what this energy and the future is about, and that really kind of describes where we're at.
The whole area is inspirational, because when you think about 1941, Monterey obviously was known for golf courses, for luxury hotel, but it wasn't an easy place to get to.
No.
You know, for somebody to travel from Spain via New York, and then you come to, of course, San Francisco, and then you had, you know, probably days of traveling to get here. It was somewhat isolated. There were train stations or so forth. So at that time, perhaps to him represented something similar to his native land, where he lived in Calicut. But it's significant enough that artists of that stature recognize the beauty of this area, natural beauty, and kind of plant this intellectual seed of art. He was involved in art here. He loved art. He was involved with Carmel Art Association. So, and hopefully now, years and years after his death, he still will create significant intellectual impact in the world of art and just in general. Culture.
I'm Mark Baer. You're watching Conversations and Collaborations. I'm very pleased to have Dmitri Piterman as my guest. The Dali 17 project is well underway and about to happen. And what's the website if anybody wants to go?
Dali17.com.
Dali17.com. We're out of here. Bye. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Conversations and Collaborations. For all episodes, go to markdavidbaer.com. See it now. Don't wait.